Welcome to the Kindle Chronicles, the Friday podcast about your Kindle, books, and all things Amazon. I'm Len Edgerly. Today is August 10th, 2018. Greetings from Ocean Park, Maine, where reading our Kindles and cooling off in the ocean have been top priorities this week. I also drove to Boston and back to attend the Voice of Healthcare Summit, an Alexa Savvy conclave convened at the Harvard Medical School by Bradley Metrock. I have been in touch with Bradley in preparation for his reinvention of Digital Book World, October 2nd through 4th in Nashville. And this was my first chance to attend one of his events. I thought it was very impressive, and on this episode you will hear conversations with two of the speakers, Devin Nadar of Boston Children's Hospital and Nathan Treloar, president of a Boston-based voice and healthcare startup named Orbita. We'll also take a look at the news and your comments, along with the official launch of a 10th anniversary giveaway of a brand new Kindle Paperwhite. Details on that at the end of the show. First up in news, I will have a link in the show notes to a story about an artificial intelligence project based on the works of William Shakespeare. It's called Deep-Speare, and when it tried to generate 4-line poems, the rhyme and meter were pretty good, but the project authors honestly concluded, quote, "Despite excellent form, the output of our model can easily be distinguished from human-written poetry due to its lower emotional impact and readability. Good news for MFA poetry graduates like yours truly." Also in news, a top Alexa executive named Tony Reed did an on-camera interview with NBC News at the Seattle headquarters. She said Amazon's ultimate goal for Alexa is to have it become more human-like. Part of that is designing answers to questions like this. This is my own demo based on the interview, but I'm going to give you a chance to see what you think about which of the 3 devices that you can try to get an empathetic response from would do the most to improve your mood. Computer, I'm depressed.
Sorry to hear that. Talking to a friend, listening to music, or taking a walk may help. I hope you feel better soon.
Hey Google, I'm depressed.
Oh no, it may not be much, but let me know if there is anything I can do for you.
Let's get the iPhone. I have my Apple HomePod is at the house in Cambridge, but we can get Siri involved here. Hey Siri, I'm depressed.
I'm sorry to hear that.
What do you think? One thing I've noticed is that the Google device gives different answers. The first time I talked about being depressed, she just said talk to someone. This answer that we just heard, I think, was a little more empathetic. But I still think that the Alexa voice sounded more empathetic, and its answer had a little bit closer to the human qualities that the Tony Reed was talking about in the interview. Also in news, a Bloomberg contributor named Shira Ovid this week wrote a thoughtful consideration of data related to the question of whether or not Amazon is a monopoly that should be regulated. It depends on what number you look at, as you can imagine. Amazon has about 5% of retail spending in the U.S., but about 49% of online spending. An interesting fact in the column is that less than 10% of retail spending in the U.S. is online versus 23% in China and 16% in South Korea. You will also find links in the show notes at thekindlechronicles.com to a story about Amazon's setting up an experimental health clinic for employees at Seattle's headquarters. That was referred to me by listener Carol Cox, and to a Seattle Times consideration of the $10 million Amazon has quietly donated to literary nonprofits in the past 10 years. I'll turn now to Tech Tips. Listener Tom Semple shared a link to a recent report showing overall tablet sales are down 13.5% and that Amazon's share of tablets worldwide has fallen 33.5%, putting it 5th behind Lenovo. Apple's share grew from 5% to 34.9%. That was a little context for Tom's own thoughts on an iPad Pro 12.9 inch that he has purchased. It's available for $949. He writes that it has lived up to his expectations as a great way to carry sheet music around. His favorite app for this is forScore, FORSCORE. That's available at the iTunes App Store for $9.99. Tom writes, I am just scratching the surface of music production possibilities. He also mentions, I think he means Nebo, Nebo. It came through in the email as Nevo, Nevo. But anyway, I found this is a note-taking app for $7.99 from MyScript. And if this is the one that Tom's talking about, he says it has very good handwriting recognition with Apple Pencil and supports split screen, but I think it is not quite the killer note-taking app one might wish for. Tom added that a recent Kindle 6th generation and later update to 5.9.7 added the ability to return library and Kindle Unlimited books directly from the home screen. That's pretty handy. He also had more information about a feature that I spotted recently, which he said is called Book Mentions. It creates a link to Kindle Store for books that are mentioned within the text of the book. There's a tiny book icon next to the underlined item. You can turn it off in Settings, Reading Options, Highlights, and About This Book. Tom says the green theme for the Kindle iOS update, which I mentioned, replicates the Fire's Kindle app, which has been there for quite a while. And also back in the 70s, there was at least one publisher that printed mass market paperbacks on green paper. Supposedly it was easier on the eyes than bleached paper. Perhaps that inspired the green theme he wrote. There are several third-party reading apps that give full customization to text and background color. I don't have any need or desire for that level of customization myself. I normally use the black theme on my iPhone and tablets and find it more comfortable most of the time, and particularly in low light conditions. I emailed back to Tom. I wondered if that Book Mentions, which I think is pretty handy. You see a little icon of a book and you go straight to see it on the store. I wondered if publishers have to prepare that to have it active on their Kindle titles. He replied as follows. My guess about Book Mentions is that they are generated by Amazon somehow. They don't necessarily point to books by the same publisher. About This Book has shown mentioned in this book links for a while. You have to scroll down to the bottom to see it. But I don't remember seeing them tagged inline in the text until recently or as one of the reading options. It could be I was not paying attention. In fact, I never noticed the tiny settings link to reading options at the very bottom of the About This Book page. Always something to learn. Indeed, and I'm always grateful for the detailed tips that Tom has shared with us for years as a listener and a participant in the show. Let's turn now to the Voice of Healthcare Summit. My first interview there was with Devin Nadar, who has a complicated title at Boston Children's Hospital. She is Partnerships Manager for the Innovation and Digital Health Accelerator at the hospital. Now, that hospital happens to be an important institution in the life of me and my sister Stephanie. We both had knee operations one summer at Children's. That would have been 50 years ago. That was way before anyone thought of digital tools that Devin and her teammates are deploying in this world-renowned medical center for children. It's really quite a place. I sat down with Devin in what began as an empty breakout room at the Harvard Medical School campus. As you will hear at the end of our chat, our use of the room came to an abrupt stop a little before I had planned on finishing. You'll also hear references in this conversation to a term which everyone at the summit clearly knew more about than I did. It's HIPAA, H-I-P-A-A, which stands for the U.S. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act of 1996. The act requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to publicize standards for the electronic exchange, privacy, and security of health information. I began by asking Devin to explain how Boston Children's Hospital more than 2 years ago created the KidsMD skill for Alexa, the first consumer-facing medical information skill on the Alexa platform.
It started off as a research project that we had. So we had kind of this set of conditions and treatments and common illnesses, kind of what parents wanted to know about their child's health. And we said, voice is a really new, neat technology, and we want to try a new medium. So we had an internal kind of innovator who, he's really interested in voice technology, and he said, I think this is a great use case. So we honestly just wanted to get something out there and get in the market. and thought there was a great opportunity around being the trusted source of pediatric educational information. So at the time, Amazon was the only developer platform that you could go in and publish your own skills, and that really led to our decision to kind of bring our first pediatric use case to Voice.
Now, I tried it, and it's drop dead simple now because all I have to do is say, Alexa, enable the KidsMD skill. I don't have to do it on my phone the way you used to. And then what happens next? What's a situation that a parent or someone else, a grandparent, might find this really useful in a certain setting?
So I think a good example is the fact that we've integrated with Rang, which is a smart thermometer. So out there you can actually buy these. They're relatively inexpensive, but a smart thermometer that will digitally take your child's temperature. If you take your child's temperature with a Rang thermometer, it will input that information into the KidsMD skill and say, for example, your child has a fever of 101.2. The skill will then ask you how old your child is. Given that information, it will say, okay, this is an instance where you might want to schedule an appointment with your PCP. There's a lot of disclaimers in the skill, as you might have noticed if you use it, but it will also tell you if, for example, you should use a certain dose of children's Tylenol. So that's a great example of something that you might have had to Google or search or look on the back of your, the bottle for. It's quick information that no one wants to memorize, but it's just the idea that I think that, if my child is between this and this age, I should use this dose, but it's going to be verified by Boston Children's Hospital. So that's really the idea behind it, is just kind of providing that sense of trust in the information and confidence.
So when you hook up the smart thermometer, is there a Rang app on the iPhone that you have to get it to talk to, or how does it get from the thermometer information to your skill?
So I'm not a developer, so this is kind of the high level version, but basically there's it's set up within the KidsMD skill already, so there's a little bit of configuration at the beginning when you kind of turn on the thermometer, but after that the information flows directly into the Amazon Alexa app, so you don't actually have to do a separate app for Rang.
Okay, and so if I've got it all set up and I take the temperature, does Alexa immediately start talking to me?
So I haven't. So when I used it last, I think that you have to invoke the KidsMD skill first.
Okay,
so
and
just
then
say,
take the temperature.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the idea of open it, and then you turn on your thermometer, input it, and then the information flows into it.
Wow, that's fascinating. The other thing I tried out is the Echo Show version of it, which was nice because Alexa, I said, okay, I was thinking of my grandson. He's got a fever. He's 4. I didn't know how much he weighs, so I just guessed. And it came up, and I was seeing the script on the screen, but it didn't scroll. And when I tapped the screen, the audio stopped. So it looks like it's early stages on what it looks like on the show, I guess.
Yeah, so because we released it 2 years ago, it's on our roadmap to do a V2 of the kind of the version that would be more compatible and also more engaging with the show. Because it has that interface in the video as well, we're going to enhance it a little bit so it's not just the text, but there's actually the option to scroll, there's more information. It's going to be a much better user experience, so that is on our roadmap and in the plans for, I believe, the next 6 months, that we would have a V2 that would be a much better visual experience with the show, but it would still work just as well with the Echo or with a Dot, so it would actually be a customized experience to the device that you have.
Oh, and it can tell which device you're using.
Correct.
The other thing you mentioned in the conversation with Bradley was that it's getting easier for people to find and enable skills. You used to have to go into your phone and search for it and tap on enable. But it seemed like I still have to say, ask KidsMD. I tried going, ask KidsMD about fever, and it immediately brought me into KidsMD at sort of the fever symptom place. Could you also just say, Alexa, what should I do about my child's fever? And it would go straight to KidsMD?
So we're still waiting a little bit on the Amazon side because they're enabling something called skill discovery, which I think I mentioned on that as well. But the idea being that you would almost have this kind of library that would already be installed on your device, and then when you asked a question, you wouldn't have to invoke the KidsMD skill. It would kind of already know that you had, say, a library that included KidsMD because you'd installed it once, and then it would direct your question to a specific skill based on the content.
Oh.
And the other piece of it that's also appealing is the ability to suggest skills. So right now you kind of have to know that the KidsMD skill exists and invoke it in some way, like you were mentioning. But we're hoping, and Amazon hasn't released this yet, so we don't know all the specific details, but the idea would be that if you were to ask a question about fever, Alexa would say, hey, I can ask KidsMD that question, and it would almost prompt you to use a particular skill. And that's really what we're hoping for, because one of the kind of barriers with voice in general is you don't know what's out there. You don't really know, like you do with a phone, what app options you have. So it's a little bit harder for people to find new things. So Amazon in general is pretty concerned about that, because they don't just want people to use it for their kind of 3 basic cases, being an alarm, music, and maybe reordering something, and the weather, exactly. So they're trying to expand the use because they want it to be stickier, and that will inevitably benefit us as well, because if we're kind of linked to kids' fever, for example, then we would be the kind of go-to skill in that situation.
You'd want to position yourself so the user knew enough that you existed to put the KidsMD data into their Alexa profile somehow.
Exactly.
But once you've done that, you're going to be the go-to skill if the word fever gets mentioned.
Right.
Or diarrhea or something.
Yeah, and that's our hope. And, we've obviously, as everyone has been talking to Amazon and trying to get them excited about what we're doing.
Yeah.
And just, say that we've had such great success with this skill, and we think that there's a ton of parents and, a lot and grandparents out there who are using it, and, that we can do even more if we have more users, if we can expand the content, if we can, again, have better versions of everything we're doing.
And tell the story with numbers so far. What kind of impact have you seen with KidsMD?
So in 2 years, we've had over 100,000 user interactions, and the statistic that I like even more is 200 unique users per week.
Added.
Yes. So basically, right now, even though it's 2 years old, and we, haven't done a robust V2, we still have more and more people finding it and using it. So that's really appealing to us, because it means that the questions that we're able to answer are valid, and people are asking those questions and finding either KidsMD because they've heard about it, or they just have these questions and they're directed there. So really for us, the fact that there's not that many great healthcare skills out there, I just read a recent article kind of talking about how bad the healthcare skills on Amazon Alexa are, and we think that we have the opportunity to be a good one, and so there's the fact that we just continue getting more and more users every week.
So you're getting
great.
200 new users
unique
a week.
Users a week.
Unique users a week. So how many total have used it, or what's the user count that you can see over the full 2 years?
So I think that we lost some of the data the last time that I checked with our head developer, so that's why I don't have the specific numbers for you.
Okay, yeah. Now, the other thing that you've talked about is Alexa being of use to clinicians, the doctors, the providers, and the challenge of the language, that they use terms which aren't kind of in normal speech. Is that another place where you would hope to sort of download a data set to a device that's in an emergency room, something that would already know what some of those terms were and get the information faster to the provider?
So we've been doing a number of internal pilots at Boston Children's Hospital and using a lot more clinical terms, obviously, in those. And our hope is that as Amazon has that data and as we continue to talk to them and encourage them to think more about the healthcare space, that they would actually almost adopt that vocabulary into their general
into just the general... Oh,
yes.
I see. There wouldn't really have to be... I mean, yeah, I'm sure the power of the data that Alexa can draw on, you don't really need to just have a separate subset for emergency room people.
No, so we think that it would be much more powerful if, just generally speaking, Alexa knew more and had exposure to more of this vocabulary that's very highly specialized. And then a specific skill may take more advantage in that, if you're thinking about AI, if it was a healthcare specific skill, the assumption would be that the term would be clinical, as opposed to the assumption being that the term is something that an everyday user would use. So I think it's that differentiator in the skill itself that would actually make it more powerful. So just the idea that there'd be some sort of a base vocabulary that might be different for that skill, but overall Amazon should have, kind of everything in their vocabulary.
Exactly. Yeah, and Alexa is going to have to learn some Latin to make these medical terms. She says, "Oh, this must be a doctor I'm talking to." I've been fascinated at how fast Amazon has responded to the opportunity that they kind of created. I mean, Jeff Bezos has said, I think, to his shareholders in a shareholders letter last year, this has had an amazing growth, and therefore we're just throwing all the resources at it that we can think of. And, I think they're hiring thousands of people, and I've wondered, what do those thousands of people do? I mean, and my sense in hearing what you're saying is, well, you're probably dealing with some Alexa team people for the medical stuff, and maybe there's another group that's working with the car industry and all the different things that this technology could help. Is that your sense of what it means when they throw resources at their Alexa platform? What kinds of things are they doing that benefit someone like you?
So I would imagine that they're tackling it from a lot of different areas. I think they're probably thinking about acquiring, companies, and, the acquisition of PillPack is a perfect example. They're thinking about strategically where do they want to go in the market. I'm sure they're throwing a lot of resources at the HIPAA compliance piece, so from the hardware and software perspective of that, so how to...
And did they just sort of get that approved recently? I heard that the cloud is now HIPAA compliant.
So basically the concern is that the smart speakers themselves aren't HIPAA compliant. So that's what they need to work on, at least from the healthcare perspective, before you can reasonably, and most institutions will even think about having smart speakers that could record patient identifying information.
The other question I had as I was listening to you is you've drilled down pretty deeply into Alexa in use at Boston Children's Hospital. Do you use Alexa at home for those same four things, or do you do any sort of creative things with Alexa just in your own life?
We have a number of devices in our home. I use it for the things that I mentioned, so alarms and music. All of our lights are also controlled. Our air conditioner is controlled.
Really?
So we have a pretty connected smart home. But we ask a lot of questions, figure out what's new, and you can also do the daily briefing, so those, or listen to podcasts. So I wish I could say that I was super creative and had all of my own skills and my own developer account, but I'm not there yet.
Well, when you have your lights set up, do you have them say, turn on the lights in the living room, or what does your light system look like?
So you can actually turn them on by specific rooms, and then you can also link the different lights together. So if you, so in our house, you can say reading time, and it turns on like the softer lights in certain rooms, and then turns off the overhead lights. So we've actually got kind of sets of lights that are controlled. And at Christmas, all of our holiday lights are controlled, and you can say Christmas time. So you can be creative, and I think it scared my parents the first time they came to my house, but they got the hang of it pretty quickly.
Yeah. I've experimented with that too. I've found that some of these devices, like I'll buy a plug from some third party, I'll plug it in, I've got to get their app downloaded, I've got to get it connected to Alexa. It's not sort of really plug and play to get that stuff working.
No, not yet. And it's funny because we have some smart light bulbs, and then we have some smart plugs like you were mentioning, and even in the time between purchasing the smart light bulbs and the smart plugs, the plugs are way easier to set up and work with. So again, I think that just points to the fact that this technology is really rapidly evolving, and a lot of companies and a lot of people are throwing money and resources at it. So the kind of speed at which it's getting much better is impressive, and I think a little bit unprecedented kind of in this space as well.
I was a patient at in those days it was called Children's Hospital Medical Center, CHMC, and I had knee operations when I was about 13, one on each leg, And I was in the hospital for a week or so and had a big leg cast. And I'm trying to think back, there maybe were a few TVs, but nothing of this digital age. And the patient experience of, well, there's nurses, there's doctors, it's all sort of on the human scale. And now, even the current situation, I'm sure, is radically different at the hospital, and you're sort of working on the future of it, how digital devices are going to help provide the care. Do you have any sense of, obviously a lot of things have been gained, what's lost in having a hospital so plugged in now versus what it was like 10, 20, 30 years ago?
I actually think we've been incredibly thoughtful in the way that we engage patients from the patient experience perspective with technology. And the reason that I say that is we've had the opportunity to talk to a lot of different groups at the hospital about their interest in voice and where we could be helpful. And I think those conversations, as well as just working in the hospital in general, have given me an appreciation for how much we think about our patients and really do put our patients first. And just to give you a little bit of an example, we have child life specialists who are an incredible group of individuals who their main goal is to just make sure that the patient and the family has a good experience at Boston Children's Hospital. And they're thinking about what games they can be playing with the kids. They're thinking about, if there are, certain, if there's like information about services at the hospital or groups of people, or if what's the best local takeout for a particular type of cuisine. It's basically their job to make children comfortable and prepared also for the experience that they're going to have at Boston Children's Hospital. So they'll walk families through, what the process will look like. They'll help you get from place to place. They're really just thinking about, again, how tough it is to be a patient at Children's, how tough it is for the child and for the family. And they think about technology, and for example, they carry around iPads so that they can pull up videos, so that they can ask a child what their favorite TV show is and automatically know what the main characters are. It's really that sense of getting to know the child and the family, and they've kind of said that they think voice is a great opportunity to do that even better. So we're all being really thoughtful about where voice makes sense and where it will actually take away from that interaction and that human connection. And we don't want to create use cases where we're taking away from that human interaction.
You maintain that balance.
Exactly.
Are there any Alexa devices in use in the hospital now for patients?
Not yet. So that's one of the use cases we're exploring, and we've thought about kind of just an assistant that would know where things are in the hospital, that you could just, again, that a parent could come over and ask, I'm looking for the closest coffee shop, what would you recommend? Those easy use cases. But we've focused mostly on clinical use cases up to now, but that's an area that we know we want to move into.
Yeah.
I had a few more questions for Devin, but at that moment, a woman with a notepad entered the room, and there was a lot of bustling out in the hallway, and she made it clear that the time for our use of the room, which I hadn't booked it, we just wandered in there and it looked like it was free, was over.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we actually have the spaces reserved
Sure.
for 104 students who are about to flood this area.
Okay.
Sorry.
I think everyone at the Voice of Healthcare Summit would agree that voice is going to be embedded in everything, that we're seeing that revolution underway right now. And if you are interested in this development in technology, Bradley Metrock has a network of podcasts you might want to check out. In addition to Voice in Healthcare, a podcast that featured an excellent interview with Devin Nadar, separate from my own, VoiceFirst FM, that's the name of the network, includes This Week in Voice. That's a show that's on my personal must-listen list. The Alexa podcast, Alexa in Canada, the VoiceFirst Roundtable, and several others. They're all about voice technology. The next person you will hear, Nathan Treloar, put up a slide that blew my mind, so to speak, because it showed a kind of a mesh head wrap around someone's head to indicate the next mode of communicating with computers via brain waves. The pace at which new technology arrives is accelerating, so I think you can be pretty sure that Alexa in your mind is likely to be here sooner than you think.
I'm Nate Treloar, president and co-founder of Orbita. We're a software company here in Boston, and we help healthcare organizations across the industry industry tap into the power of next-generation voice-assistive technologies exemplified by Amazon, Alexa, and Google Assistant, and others.
And you have a personal reason why you got into this work.
I do, yeah. About 3 years ago now, my mom, who was in her mid-80s, broke her leg tripping on her cat. And she was already a bit mobility challenged. And the experience of being a caregiver for my mom and seeing sort of how that whole process unfolded from going from the emergency room to the recovery center, nursing facility, and then ultimately back home, where she had particular needs, and we couldn't be there with her 100% of the time. The reaction was there's got to be something better, and with the promise of technologies like Amazon Alexa, which was just sort of coming out at the time, we tried a few things and saw some impact, and it was sort of that very abstract sort of observation that compelled me to kind of look a little bit more closely at voice in general as an assistive technology in digital health.
So fast forward, what kinds of technology are you employing to help your mom's situation now?
Well, she's unfortunately she's now in a long-term care center, so there's only so much we can do, in terms of setting her up in that facility, and also she's lost the ability to speak, so voice is sort of out of the realm. But up until her stroke in April, she was able to use voice-assistive technology, and it was a useful tool, I'll say. But as we look at what are the other options for my mom at this stage, we have to look a little beyond voice.
Yeah. You made a comment in your talk about how Alexa doesn't mind if you ask a question over and over, and that can actually be kind of a comforting thing for people who are, in some phase of memory loss.
Yeah, more than that, actually. It's not even just a comfort. If you're somebody who is in, let's say, the early and middle stages of Alzheimer's, you have enough cognitive capability to know that you're losing your memory or something's not right. To be reminded of that by your own spouse is a difficult thing. And if your spouse gets frustrated by the fact that you've asked them 5 times in the last 20 minutes what day is today, or what's on my schedule, or where are we, or where we're going, that's anxiety producing, and anxiety can result in worsening of other conditions. It's a physical problem. So the advantage of an Alexa being without ego is that you can ask her those questions without shame or fear or anything. And so it's more than just comfort. It can be actually physically a better situation.
Have you had any projects involving the Echo Show in healthcare situations? We have been mostly oriented around use cases where there's a visual element that needs to be part of the experience, whether it's presenting the instructions in a textual way or showing a video for like a therapy coach. Here's how you should hold the device, or here's how you should be moving your joint. Very useful in those situations. Yeah. You had a slide that showed the modalities of communication with computers, keyboard, mouse, and now voice is there. But the one that you had at the far right kind of blew my mind as to what's coming, the direct brain-computer interface. What might that look like, and how soon is it coming?
Well, I'll caveat that I'm not an expert on this. I know about it. I've read a little bit about it. But it's one of those areas of technology that's advancing faster than I think a lot of people appreciate. There's money going into it. The level of accuracy and being able to process the signals coming out, the weak signals coming out of the human brain, to be able to interpret some meaning and apply it, has gotten better and better. And it's kind of similar to voice processing. It's based on the ability to learn from huge volumes of data. So the more data that's collected on how the brain signals and operates, the more precise we can be in interpreting those signals. And so what I know is happening is that's getting a lot better. There's still some challenges, like how do you physically capture those signals? You have to wear a helmet, and things like that. And I don't know exactly how that's progressed, but I do believe that we'll start to see some of that become a bit more mainstream. Whether there'll be an Amazon Echo type of release that comes from one of the big guys or not in the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know of anything coming down the pike like that, but I wouldn't be surprised.
The aspect of Alexa feeling like a person that has been referenced here, and I think you mentioned the idea of programming in empathy in the interface. Mm-hmm. That seems right and helpful, and also kind of creepy. That you're creating an illusion of a human interface. But is it both things at once? It's comforting and creepy, or how do you look at that part of it?
Well, at the risk of switching into a philosophical discussion, right? What is an illusion and what's real, right? And in the case of the people we've dealt with, they know it's not real, but it doesn't matter. They want to believe that there's some empathy in it. They want to know that Alexa has a favorite color or a favorite kind of dog. I was on a panel with one of the individuals, I think she was from LQ, and she said that one of the biggest criticisms that they got in their first version that they rolled out is that they hadn't built into the voice assistant her favorite dog or her favorite color or what she likes to do in her spare time. That was one of the bigger complaints, is that from the elderly, that they didn't build in that empathy, even though they cognitively know that it's just a machine. They wanted an experience that was more human.
I wanted to check for myself that Alexa is being customized this way, and I have a Google Home here, so I can try that as well. I've changed the wake word on my Echo Show to computer, because that way it doesn't... I can ask it questions on my parents' network, and then I can ask Alexa questions on my own network. Computer, what's your favorite dog?
That would be Labradors.
Hey Google, what's your favorite dog?
Every type of dog is special, but I have a soft spot for miniature schnauzers. They're loyal, intelligent, and have the best beards.
When I tried the other question that Nate mentioned, it looked like the Google Assistant was slightly ahead. Computer, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Hey Google, what do you like to do in your spare time?
I've been practicing the fine art of beatboxing.
Here's the rest of my conversation with Nate.
It strikes me that there's a parallel with literature, that a novel creates a story, it's fictional, and yet if it's powerfully and beautifully done, you relate to the characters in a way that stirs your own emotions, changes your life. It doesn't seem like that big a stretch to say that the people designing these interfaces are doing that level of creative work that can have that kind of impact in people's lives, only it's more immediate, it's more contextual, but there's some kind of a common creative process there, isn't there?
Yeah, except that your books don't talk back or ask you questions. That's a big difference right there.
Yeah, it maybe loops back to literature. You could have books that talk back. You write a book and somehow the characters can start talking to you.
Right. Well, there are, and this has been around for years, books that allow you to influence which direction the story plot goes. And there's actually a few companies, at least one that I know of, that does that on Alexa.
Right.
There's also a skill out there, I think it's a company called SoundMind, called Memory Lane, which allows you to ask a question, what was happening on this date in 1961. And it'll come back and say, here's what's happening. And sort of the next step on that is what was happening in my life.
Yeah.
In my life. So being able to record the experiences that you had. Well, in 1961, you got married.
Yeah.
And for people who are elderly, have dementia, those sorts of experiences can be very therapeutic.
And there would be a way of loading that information in somehow?
Yeah, the children might do it. It might be part of the experience itself. Tell me what you were doing in 1961. Do you remember?
Wow.
Do you remember when you got married? I have a recording that my sister made of my grandfather when my sister was 13 in junior high school. This was a long time ago, and talking about his experiences in World War II. And it is gold. It's family gold, that whole recording. And so there's a possibility with these technologies to kind of capture memories.
Yeah.
More than just Google Drive.
Yeah. Last question. I've heard a lot of discussion of whether Alexa is HIPAA compliant. And I thought I had heard the Amazon Cloud last week became HIPAA compliant, but the devices are not HIPAA compliant. What's going on in that realm?
The Amazon Web Services, which is their cloud environment, have been HIPAA compliant for a while.
Okay.
They've offered a HIPAA compliant version, and I think up until maybe just 6 months ago, it was a special offering, and now it's all HIPAA compliant. So if you're using Amazon Web Services, it's HIPAA compliant. I believe that was the most recent announcement. Alexa, which is sort of its own separate service. It's a cloud-based speech processing and voice-assisted technology stack. That is not HIPAA compliant yet. So
what does that mean, HIPAA compliant?
HIPAA compliant means that it means that they're willing to sign what's called a business associates agreement, which means that they will respect the requirements and regulations of HIPAA, and kind of pass that up to the organization that requires that. It's what's called a covered entity hospital. The hospital has a requirement to work with technology vendors and providers that will be willing to sign a business associates agreement. And Amazon won't do that right now. So it's sort of a policy procedure problem. From a technical point of view, they can check most of the boxes on the technology side. They do full encryption. There's an open question, I believe, about what they're storing. They do store the transcription, and they store the audio of what the person has said to Alexa.
After the wake word.
After the wake word. So that's stored. And you can, as an individual, you can go in and delete it, but it's actually being stored in the Amazon cloud. So they have to do something in order to address.
Is that the source of their resistance to becoming HIPAA compliant?
I wouldn't claim to have an insight into what they're particularly concerned about, but they're being, I think, appropriately cautious before they jump into this. It's not a small move, right? There have been some very large data breaches and in the healthcare industry, and they don't want to see Amazon's name associated with a new one.
I see.
So I understand that.
Yeah. Great. Thanks very much.
All right.
I want to share a comment that came in from listener David McQuaid, who had asked if I would recommend his buying a Kindle Oasis. I said yes without reservations, and he replied, "Hi Len, thanks for the response and feedback. I ended up trading in my Paperwhite and buying the Oasis. I agree with you. It is a flat-out joy to use. The screen looks fantastic. I really like the larger size, which is something I've been wishing Amazon would do with a Kindle for a long time. While I can understand some reviews that say the aluminum back is slippery, I like the feel of it when I'm settled in my reading position. For some reason, I was never very happy with my Kindle Paperwhite and actually preferred to read on my basic Kindle. The form factor was the same, but the basic Kindle was lighter, and I'm not much of a bed reader, so I could use an outside light source. But the new form factor of the Oasis and the larger screen make for a much more pleasurable reading experience for me, and it's so nice to have buttons back on the Kindle. Congrats on 10 years. I've been a listener since 2012 when I bought my first Kindle. I've always admired your dedication to the podcast and the way you've structured and organized it through all of these years. Best, David." Thanks, David. I'm glad you are enjoying your new Oasis. Next week's guest will be Seattle author Robert Dugoni, who has sold more than 3 million copies of his novels, published by Amazon's Thomas and Mercer imprint. Darlene seldom loves a book so much that she tells me, "You must have this author on your show," but that's exactly what happened when she finished Dugoni's Close to Home. That's book 5 in the author's Tracy Crosswhite series. I'm scheduled to talk to him Monday, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to give away a brand new Kindle Paperwhite on August 30th at noon. That's my birthday. I'll do the drawing around noon Eastern Time. If you are already subscribed to the free Kindle Chronicles newsletter, you are already eligible. I'll just use all those names in the list that I draw from. If you'd like to join the newsletter, you can become eligible if you're on that newsletter list by August 30th. And if you just want to enter it to get into the contest and then unsubscribe, that's fine with me. No worries. I send it out every week when the show is up, and it usually has some information about what's on the show. I'd say there's a decent odds of winning the Paperwhite because we have 464 people subscribed to the newsletter now. We might get a few more entering to be eligible for the drawing. Good luck to everyone who enters. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles from Ocean Park, Maine. I really appreciate your taking the time to listen to my show. Have a great day. Bye.